All right. Good evening. Welcome to the Everyday Marksman. I am Matt Robertson. I'm going to be your host this evening. I'm glad you could join me. The topic of the day is the minimum capable citizen. And I just bumped the hell out of my mic. Forgive me for that one. So we're talking the minimum capable citizen. And for those of you who have followed the Everyday Marksman for a while, you know this is building on a concept I call the minimum capable carbine, which I did not come up with. I stole that, intellectually borrowed from the late Pat Rogers. And the idea behind the minimum capable carbine is like there's a lot of cool stuff you can buy out there in the world, and you can start to spend a ton of money on a rifle. And a lot of people fall down this rabbit hole of spending so much money on the rifle, they actually fail to go shoot the rifle and gain any kind of proficiency with it. So a minimum capable carbine is the absolute minimum to say that, like, look, this is good enough that you're not going to outperform this until you get better yourself. And to me, that's represented by something pretty simple with something that's reliable, it's accurate enough, it's got a optic, a light, and a sling. And that's it. That's the starting point. And I emphasize reliability over everything else. And to me, the optic is optional. I'm happy to go along with the iron sights for a while as well. So that's the minimum capable carbine. Now, for those of you who are watching, make sure you give me a ping in the chat. Let me know that this is actually working correctly. You can hear me. So here's the range card for the day. So we're going to talk about the minimum capable citizen. Now, what is the minimum capable citizen? That's the topic of the day. So we'll go first into the history. We're going to introduce Doc Larsen, our guest of the day. Then we're going to go into the history of civilian military training in the United States. We have a long history of doing this. And it is something that is near and dear to my heart as the everyday marksman. And it's something that I believe is close to Doc Larsen's heart as well. And then we're going to talk about what is available currently. And I have a video that kind of inspired this conversation that we are going to show a clip from one of Doc's videos. And then we're going to go into some of the traps and pitfalls people get into with training. And then we're going to try and define the minimum capable citizen. So it's going to be a little while before we get there. And then we'll have, of course, the customary question and answers. So if that all sounds good to you, let's get to it. I'm going to go ahead and bring Doc on here and have him introduce himself. All right, Doc, good evening.
Good evening, and thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you for coming. So if you don't mind, for those people who don't actually already know who you are, go ahead and give a quick introduction.
Quick. First off, I don't have easy yes or no answers, so I'm not real good at quick answers or introductions. But you can sum it up by saying I'm a nerd. I'm part of this community, which it is a nerd. But let me say that it's something also that we've in recent years and recent decades have lost, and that is that I'm a firm advocate of competency. So, nerding it up is just one more way of gaining competency, right? It means that we specialize in certain areas that are of great concern or passion of ours, and that's me as well. My educational background is that I have a PhD in educational technologies and learning psychology. My area of emphasis is what's called human factors, which is human cognition. That's a mouthful. It means I study models of decision making, and the domain that I follow to look at high stress, time sensitive, austere decision making is military, law enforcement, self-defense, any of the traditional warrior entities or disciplines. That's where I look at decision-making and human cognition. So, and I have a background in the United States Army as an infantry NCO, 9 years under my belt with that. I did not do a full 20 years. I did 9 and got out. And in addition to, people will say, oh, what's your street creds? And so you got to wind up talking more about the combat theaters that you served in rather than some of the other stuff that's often more applicable. But yeah, okay. So I did a Korean DMZ tour, very proud to be an MGM scout. And then as a, what many will call a mercenary, I did a year of living dangerously in Iraq. So 2003, 2004, I was a military advisor to the Iraqi infantry. Oh, and I write books.
And you're on mute, Matt. I've actually had this one here. I've had it for a couple of years. It's sitting on my shelf, and I reference it all the time. So this is Suts 2, though. I think you have a 3rd edition out now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So,
and you know what? Let me go ahead and do a plug for that. There is the OP4. So SUTS is based, it's US centric. If you pick it up right away, Small Unit Tactics, you'll see it's US centric. There is the OP4 3 out right now. It's in its 2nd edition. It's been out for, good grief, 8-9 years. It is Soviet, what the old Soviet Red Army doctrine at Small Unit Tactics. And what will hopefully be out by this time next year is SUTS 4, which is your guerrilla and insurgent warfighter. So their tactical doctrine as well.
That's been a topic of interest lately within even the Marksman Discord server, talking about War of the Flea. I was reading Fry the Brain, a bunch of those kind of like guerrilla warfare topics. So that one's of interest to me now.
There you go.
So, all right. So I said I was going to bring a video clip here. So I know everybody likes watching themselves on video. So this is from a video you did back in October, and it kind of started this whole conversation about the video is titled, "Is Military Training Open to Civilians?" I'm only going to play a couple seconds here just to get to a quick screenshot that I think kind of highlights it, and then I can talk about it. All right. I do have it muted. Because not only do you not want to hear yourself, but this is the thing. So this screen here is what captured my attention before when you presented this. And I believe, and if I recall, what you said was, if you're thinking about military training, you're talking about an 8-year plan. You know, not necessarily this will always forever take 8 years. You could spread that over a lifetime if you wanted to, or if you had a ton of money and resources, you can compress that to a shorter amount of time. But in general, you're talking 8 years of training. And I'm going to stop there. I'm going to have you fill in the rest of the gaps. This is your video. So what did I miss? Was that about right?
Yeah, no. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to have me speak on the video. And now I'm getting confused on which one is the real me. No, so correct. The 8 years is taken from this. It is that when a person enlists in the United States Armed Forces, you have some version of 8 years. Now, there's active duty, there's reserve component duty, and there's even IRR, inactive ready reserve. But it doesn't matter. You're making an 8-year commitment. And what I mean by commitment is you're signing your name on a blank check that you issue to the federal government that says up to and including my life. So you have 8 years. And warriors that, that do this, that serve their country, have that 8-year commitment, and generally spread training over either 4 years of that really intensely and then slip into the IRR, or they spread it over a whole 8 years in some combination, typically of active and reserve component. So they'll do that in 8 years. And what I wanted to illustrate is that a civilian can do that same thing. That you can start at, let's go ahead and say age 18 to 26 or 20 to 28 is probably a little more feasible. For those of you pursuing a degree that you say, well, hold on, it's going to take me till I'm 22, 23, fine. War is a young man's game, and training is a young man's game. And I'm not saying you can't be doing this training all the way up into your 60s. Wrong. I've seen people doing this viably clear into their 60s. But what I am saying is that the younger you're achieving this competency and you're getting this training, probably the more successful. I mean, there is a correlation to age and physical vitality as well as, mental vitality. There's a correlation there to performance. So you're going to get your optimal performance if you're doing this, say, before your early 30s. And so I wanted to show an 8-year progress whenever you start, 18. I mean, some people start much earlier. Some people even start when they're 16. They get, a sugar daddy, literally their daddy, and they can go in and jump in some of this training. So you can do that whenever you start is almost immaterial. But I try to encourage people to, if they really want to be on top of their game, to finish this by early to mid 30s. Because your body is going to break and then it doesn't recover so well. But the fact is you can hobble along here, like I said, for decades to come. And you really should. There's two schools of thought. And one school of thought is that you owe the house, right? There is the ante that you have to ante up. And so you have to do your minimum time as a warrior. And the other school of thought is, no, this is a lifelong pursuit. I adhere to the last one, that this is a lifelong pursuit. So it's quite all right if you take this plan and stretch it over 20 years. Perfectly fine.
So, and one of the things that stood out to me on this plan was I was kind of happy about, and I'm put it back to highlight here is a couple of the early stages here I've done and definitely would advocate for, like Appleseed, great program. Like definitely encourage people to go get involved in Appleseed. And then when it comes to tactical guarding and carbine training, yeah, you mentioned Max Velocity. I was happy to see Max get some attention here. I've been out to his place. Great course, great curriculum. Yep. Not many places you get to do that. So, but then as you saw the rest of this, and this gets more and more interesting. But then you start seeing some divisions, and this is where I think topic is gonna wander today. Where we start seeing things like advanced first aid, tactical communications and radio, leadership skills. I get some SEER in there, and then I think I got a kick out of talking crew served weapons, but probably not going to get involved in that one. But what stood out to me and why I think this conversation is going to be interesting is, what's the minimum viable? I think we're going to come back to that at the end of this, sticking around. But when we talk about what is all these are really great things, but what is that level if you just want to be a prepared American? That you're saying, all right, I want to take more responsibility for myself, my family, my community. What do I need to focus on? Because I've got a lot of priorities to worry about on limited budget because, Uncle Sam is not paying the bills for me to go do. When I was active duty, it was nuclear weapons, ICBMs. That was a 6-month long training course that we did just as a beginner before you even left the door. Most people can't afford to do something like that. So that's the topic. Now, we're going to get to that in a bit because per our range card, the actual next topic we want to go through is the history, though, of American civilians getting military training, because this is not a new thing. Part of the Second Amendment was the militia, right? I mean, that's
correct.
Where we come from. So I shared this in a previous stream with my wife, but I think it's still very much an appropriate thing to bring up here. So this was an excerpt I happen to have. I forgot who sent this to me, but from Arms and the Man magazine, 1919, talking about the history of universal military training, which is a topic that has definitely come up to me in the past. But the interesting things about this one is it goes back into the colonies, talking about how in Virginia and Maryland, and back to the 1600s, I'm scanning around. Of course, I'm not going to find the date here. Every Virginia colonist was trained in military tactics, period. And that's just the way it was. And the next page does talk about New Hampshire colony, 1673, point to take charge. So there's a history here. And then going back into, this was written in after World War I, but after World War II, there was this resurgence of universal military training, which Eisenhower dropped in favor of new look and nuclear policy, not the theme of the day. But I don't know, what's your take? Like, what's the history look like for this?
No, I think you're hitting the nail on the head, and I appreciate you going that direction. Most people don't want, when they talk about the American militia tradition, they want to go back into the dark chapter, and it does have multiple dark chapters, let's be clear, but they all want to go back to the dark chapters of the late 1960s all the way through the mid 1990s. That was a very dark time for America militia. I think right now it's been a resurgence. I think it's for many reasons. We could wax poetic for a while on why is it being more accepted at this time and accepted across a broader spectrum of political spectrum. But nonetheless, it goes way back. People forget, and I love to remind them because it makes me look smart, and I like when I look smart. That the American Rangers, U.S. Army Rangers, run their tradition. I think back to the 1640s with Rogers Rangers. I believe that's when it started, or somebody started in the 1640s. And we can get into what ranging is too. But anyway, it starts in the 1640s, and it doesn't become part of the United States Army until it's revived through British SAS training in the 1940s. Let me say it again: 1640s to the 1940s. For those of you bad at math, that's 3 centuries Rangers have served as militia. and less than 1 century, a scant 80 years, that it has served in the Federal Army. So we have proud traditions in the American militia that go way back into the day, and arguably a rose by any other name is still a rose. If you buy into that adage, then you have to admit that there have been no American conflicts, or you'll be hard pressed to find them, that do not involve American militia to this day, right now. I just told you I was a contractor. Later, I wasn't there when they pinned it on the collar, but I saw them started to wear USV. If you know that, United States Volunteer, you know that goes back to Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders going up San Juan Hill. That tradition has been around for a long time, USV. Well, I was a USV, a contractor, a militiaman. You can call me a mercenary. All of these are true, but if we drew Venn diagrams, some would be more true than others. The point is, all the way up to present day operations, we've had U.S. militiamen and U.S. volunteers fighting in every American conflict. Wake Island in World War II, 2/3 of the defenders, I believe it was 2/3, maybe it was 1/3. I think it was 2/3 of the defenders were contractors, 1/3 were Marines.
One of the interesting things on the militia topic is you see these debates a lot more online. You know how Twitter runs, but the militia, big M militia has a stigma attached to it now. But to me, it's always been thinking about when Katrina hit back in New Orleans, and it's the neighbors who get together to fill sandbags, and do something for the community. Like everybody has the vision of, they're gonna wear the ragtag bunch of camo and whatever hunting rifles they had on, and yeah, that exists. But to me, it's more about that local group, your community, who's just saying, all right, we got to take care of ourselves here. So let's get together, whatever that means, and that can go up to defense. So yeah, I think there's a lot there, a lot of history there.
So two thoughts I have on that. First is that I've had the pleasure of working with the Missouri Militia, which is a state chartered militia, nonprofit. Good guys, very progressive. And when I say progressive here, I mean very inclusive of the demographic that they represent, right? And again, they've worked with, law enforcement agencies. They've even, collaborated with the lieutenant governor. So they are legitimately a chartered militia, and it's still a private. It's not a public. Missouri is looking at standing up a state guard, which is like a hybrid of private militia, but not quite. It's actually state financed, but they haven't done this yet. So anyway, Missouri Militia right now chartered. They were the first. That's not true. They were second with boots on the ground in the Joplin tornado F5 that leveled the city about 10 years ago in southern Missouri, if you recall, just leveled that city. FEMA showed up with no leadership, no equipment, no food, no water for their own people. So two Deuce-and-Ash carrying a platoon of the Missouri Militia pull in about half a day later, get out, set up their tents and their operations center complete with a mess section and water and food to feed their platoon, and then jumped right back on the Deuces with chainsaws and started going to work. When Colonel Sumter, the lady with FEMA that was in charge, she just latched onto him. And I want to say it was like 3 or 4 days that the Missouri Militia ran FEMA, because FEMA couldn't even give themselves water. And so they took all the FEMA volunteers, put them on trucks, got them out there, and just ran FEMA operations for 3 or 4 days until FEMA leadership finally showed up with logistics. So there's a fantastic story about the reality of the American militia. Is that the reality is that they are far more, and the Missouri Militia admits this, they're far more likely to respond to a natural disaster than a man-made disaster, i.e., armed conflict. That said, you've always got, they came armed, because you always have looters, or you don't always, hopefully you never have looters, but it's always a threat, right? So you have that and all sorts of other things. So they definitely came armed. The more recent one that I want to show, and I would like to highlight, not necessarily in this show, but I mean, just in general, as we learn more about what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, And when we say that, everybody thinks Rittenhouse. Well, Rittenhouse is a viable discussion, a topic for discussion. But I mean beyond that, broader than that. You had people coming together to save properties from being burned, to clean up properties after they were vandalized, to try and resist a riot, criminals. And so you can put Rittenhouse to the side for a minute. Again, it's worthy of discussion, but forget him for a second. Let's talk about everybody else that came together and defended that city and cleaned up that city. And what else do you call them but a militia?
Exactly. So like they say community defenders or anything like that, but at the bottom line principle was it was unaffiliated civilians who coming together for what they perceive as a common good. So it's related. Longtime followers of Everyday Marksman know I have a whole series of articles where I base around what I call Scenario X. And Scenario X is my version of, partially based on what I've lived through, but also have watched. So me growing up in South Florida, been through several hurricanes, including Katrina before it hit New Orleans, Wilma shortly after, Andrew. I lived there through that one, 92. Wow. And then I lived in Montana with lots of crazy blizzards, and I lived in California with wildfires and earthquakes and saw all that stuff. So I've seen some stuff. But Scenario X, the basic setup is there's been some kind of serious disaster or problem.
Okay.
Pandemic, if you want to go that route. And you in your little suburban neighborhood, you're far enough away from major city centers, but the major city centers are drawing in all the resources because that's where the real problems are. So there's water issues, there's food shortage, there's crime problems. So your neighborhood is more or less just kind of on its own. And now you're like a couple months into this. So this isn't just like, oh, tomorrow we're just going to switch, but you're a couple months into this. And now you've decided, like you've realized that bad things are just over the horizon because like, hey, people in other neighborhoods are starting to say like they're getting more higher levels of break-ins. They're getting, general just lawlessness that's going on. So you and your neighbors getting together saying, okay, well, we can't leave. If we could have left, we would have left already, kind of thing. So what are we going to do to protect our neighborhood? That's Scenario X, and so underlying a lot of themes of what I write about. So I guess that gets into the topic then of what are the skills? What are the skills that go into that kind of thing? So we just said it's not all just the armed conflict piece of this, though it is a factor. I believe you and I were on another live stream and I brought the whole deterrence topic, and that's definitely a big one, is that you need to present yourself that you can defend yourself. You don't want to if you don't have to, but you can. But what are the other things in there? So going back to your list here, I mean, there's communications, there's first aid, there's just general levels of leadership training that would go into that. So your example with FEMA couldn't lead their way into having water for their own people as a good example of that. Well, what do you think is kind of the other skills that might factor in?
Yeah, I'd say you hit several of them. First and foremost, your most immediately is going to be first aid, right? So because you don't know that you're going to have either a hospital or medical professionals available to you for quite some time. So go into advanced stages of first aid, right? And going into that training also, it implies and informs what you need to stock up on too, right? So, in terms of what's colloquial called preppers. Okay, that's fine. But the point is that the training then tells you what's going to be relevant in that. Aid, big one, first aid. Second one, communications. Everything from ham radios to, I don't care, smoke signal. You need, because communications, if you're learning it as a singular, I'm sorry, it's going to fail you. You need to learn it in tandem. That is, you need a backup and a backup to the backup at a bare minimum. So communications is a huge one, and ham radio operators are a godsend, but they're not. It's not everything. You can't just rely on your ham radio. The other one is land navigation, and you're going to do this for lots of reasons. You are going to patrol. It could be security, and it likely will be. Let's be honest, but it can be everything from hunting and foraging parties. It can be, I need to share logistics with this outside entity, and we share with each other. We have some kind of bartering system. So you're going to patrol for lots of different reasons. If you are over the long run, if you're holed up into your community, you're running a losing proposition. Okay. Again, I don't mean for a few days or for a week, but if this is your long-term, year in, year out solution, you have to link with other like-minded communities, other capable communities. And so land navigation is going to be a big one. And then the other one I would say for security, long before you get into active security, which comes down to shooting and fighting, you want passive security systems, which are detection. So drones and, and early warning systems and surveillance points and choke points and stuff like that. So you definitely want to familiarize with detection. That might even involve, by the way, tracking, like knowing what's coming through your area.
There's a lot in there that I would love to tag on. So first off, shout out ham radio operators. I was gonna go grab my radio. It's off to the side over here because it's something I've been advocating for and I don't practice nearly enough. But,
right.
But that's a big one. And I talked to Brent a couple of weeks ago and we were talking about One Shepherd, which I do want to plug One Shepherd while we're talking about this. But he mentioned that I guess when you're doing the field exercises, you get an SOI for how to handle it. So let's dig in that topic a little bit. What does that mean?
Okay, so SOI is Signal Operating Instructions, and it's something that has gone by the wayside with encryption, with digital encryption. So when SyncGARS came out, before SyncGARS, there was the KY57 Vincent. Digital encryption's been around for quite some time. I mean, literally, I think back to the late 1960s. But that said, most of us use just a broadband radio, some kind of broadband radio. Well, that means the enemy can hear you. Now, for those who say, whoa, there's some techniques. You can, use a directional antenna that'll cut it down to 15-degree spread. So if you're not inside that 15-degree spread, you can't hear. Or the other way is the umbrella, using your ionosphere, like the Henley Heaviside layer, and turning your directional antennas upwards so it cascades down. Here again, people can hear you, but the good news is they can't find you by direction, radar direction findings and stuff like this. So, and
just for anybody who's listening to that one, you just mentioned pointing upwards. It's called NVIS or NVIS. If anybody's trying to go Google, how do I do that? Because trust me, I fell down that rabbit hole. So I just want to make sure I put that out there.
Right. So there are techniques that you can limit who is listening to you, or at least not allow them to find your direction of your broadcast station, because there are radio ways to do this. Now, having said that, if they're listening to you, this is when you get, John has a short mustache, the chair is against the wall, right? This, sorry, that was a Wolverines reference. No, nobody read Dawn.
Oh no, okay. I got it. It was. So now I'm going to go on a tangent. Probably nobody played this game, but I'm a huge nerd. So there was a game that came out. I don't know when it was called Homefront, and it was. Take Red Dawn, but it was North Korea, and but it was the story was written by the same author as Red Dawn, so there was lots of little references to the original Red Dawn. Like you walk by a football stadium and it says Wolverines on it, so it was just a fun little I understood that reference. The game itself was okay, but anyway, sorry.
All right, no. So an SOI is again Signal Operating Instructions. It sounds rather esoteric. But what it really means is at some level of randomness, and it needs to be switched out, whether it's switched out every 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, or heck, once a week. The point is you have to rotate your SOIs so that it makes it harder to break the code. But they are codes. They say what frequencies we use. They say what our call signs are. No, running around being Blackjack 6 and Red Dragon every time, we figure out who that is. So you're not Red Dragon and you're not Blackjack 6. You're Alpha 3-1. And he's, Kilo 9-2. And there's no meaning. There's no meaning there. So these are what's called your call signs. You have, like I said, frequencies. And then you have brevity codes. Everything for asking people's situation. Hey, what's your situation? Where are you? How are you doing? What do you need? And they can make requests back and you can answer negative, positive. They can even, because you can, this isn't digitally encrypted. This is text, encrypted. You can encrypt alphanumeric, so numbers and letters. Inside of there, you can authenticate. If you think someone has broken into your SOI that you don't recognize, you can ask them for authentication. If they don't have that SOI, they'll authenticate wrong. And so these are all the different things that an SOI does for you.
So this is a conversation we actually had in the Marksman Discord server recently about brevity matrices in particular. And my background is actually quite a bit involved in this because
I'll bet.
I'm not sure how far I can go down that rabbit hole, but encoding, decoding messages was a big topic in my background. And there was actually a conversation around how likely are you to ever to get to that point where you would need to worry about that. Especially if you're having to rotate it out, how if the U.S. government's coming after you, that's a different situation than, that rowdy crowd who happened to pick up some Baofangs and is listening into your transmissions down the street. But it was an interesting conversation nonetheless. I don't want to downplay it because I think it's really cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, so a couple of historical references. First off will be Somalia and General Adid, who managed to evade all of our high-tech listening, satellites, drones, you name it. We could not pin that man down because he was using, as communication devices, rubber burning tires, human runners, and, field phones, ancient World War I field phones. So he's always one step ahead of us, and we couldn't nail him down because he used, again, in tandem, very old forms of communication. Now, you have the flip side. You have the Israelis going in and, what year did the last year they invade Lebanon against, yeah.
I'm not going to try and guess that one.
Yeah.
If you know in the chat, make sure you go ahead and drop it in there. Someone Google it for us. Yeah,
that's right. And I want to say the Fedayeen. No, not the Fedayeen. That's Iraq. Man, my brain is just not working tonight. But Hezbollah. So Hezbollah is fighting against, in the mountains there in southern Lebanon, against the Israelis. And they were using GMRS radio. But they needed an SOI. And so what they did was they had exhausted their SOIs. They kept getting, used until they were compromised, And it came to the point where they would know who they were talking on the other end, right? And so they would say something like, hey, I'll meet you at the place where you proposed to your wife. Now, how the hell would the Israelis know where that is, right? So all of this is encryption. It's all in different forms of code. But an SOI is a codified, it's a little redundant, but it's a codified code.
So it's the rules. So I feel like this deserves a conversation for a whole nother day. And I would love to get Brushbeater in on this one too, because I've talked to him before about radio. And so
they do a great radio. Yeah, they've got this fantastic week-long course.
Oh yeah. I definitely want to get out there. So I want to go back to the land nav topic though, because I think this is a big one that gets forgotten about because so many people are just so accustomed to GPS now. And again, having been in the Air Force and the space nuclear side of it, I understand how quickly that can be turned off on you, much less attacked. The government can just turn it off. Like not for them, they can turn it off for you and everybody else. So I think a lot of people forget about the land nav side of it to the point where I feel like it wasn't even getting talked about anymore. It was a very basic level. Like when I did it, through my basic training, it was pretty rudimentary. We didn't even go through grid squares or anything. It was like, here's how you pick a heading and then how you pace it out, go that way. It was just like, I know you all cover that, right? At One Shepherd.
Oh yeah. Yeah. About a day and a half of it. There's a night portion to it and everything. Yeah. And then of course we cover it, but the big thing is to make sure that inside the curriculum and specifically every 7-day semester, it's 7 days all shoved together. They all culminate with a 3-day FTX, field training exercise. It just means a big war game. It's a lot of fun. But of course, you get plenty of time to do that because you're thinking, wow, I just went through land nav. Well, when will I use that again? And then just a few days later, it's 2:00 in the morning and they say, hey, you go lead this reconnaissance. And guess what? You whip out your compass and your map and your protractor and you go, oh, Lordy, I've got to go, 1.5 kilometers in the middle of the night and get these guys back safely. So, yeah.
And so something, I don't know, maybe you have a suggestion. I have my land nav book back there, but I don't want to go back, get up because warning for everybody watching this, especially as you get closer to 40, do your warm-ups. I messed up my back at the gym the other day. So That's why I'm sitting and I don't want to stand up right now. So, but yeah, I know you can get free Topo Maps pretty much anywhere. So like, I think my
Yep.
Topo is where I go for mine, and then you can just get them. You can order them too, and they can different grid sizes. Really useful tool if you just want to have your whole region kind of like in a book and keep track of it.
Well, not only can you get them from Geological Survey, you can
Mhm.
also get them from what used to be called Defense Mapping Agency, now called Geospatial. What is it? Agency? Is it GSA? I
Oh
think is what
yeah, yeah. I know.
it's
Yeah, they're
renamed.
local here. They're actually, I think they're just around here, unless I'm
Right. So
thinking
you, if
USGS.
you know which, if you know which quadrangle you want, you can actually go and ask them for it. And if they have it, they give it to you either free or at some small charge. And that's great because now you're getting the 1 over 100,000, 1 over 50,000, 1 over 25,000 grid squares. And I find that very useful. I've used plenty of U.S. geological surveys. Not only can you use that because as long as you know your terrain, it's okay, right? There's other ways to figure out exactly where you are. It's not useful for calling in fire like an artillery, but beyond that, it's pretty damn useful. And frankly, at One Shepherd, what they'll do is they'll go ahead and draw grid squares in. That our cartography just goes ahead and puts in 100-meter grid squares just to make it a little easier.
Cool. So, I don't want to linger too long on Lanav. That's a big one. Mentioned communications is a big one. Mentioned medical. So I think that's another big one, and that's another rabbit hole to itself. But I think everybody can agree, like some level of understanding of those is probably important. What else? What else am I missing on here?
Detection, tracking, and I would go ahead and throw in hunting then as well.
So
Hunting.
I'm going to come back to the hunting one because I kind of tie that. I should think, then I should speak. I think that ties together a few things. Like you get the marksmanship side of it, and you get the tracking and observation piece. So hunting also could be used as a training exercise for a lot of things.
Sure.
Unfortunately, having spent almost 6 years living on Montana, I never actually went hunting, and I kind of regret doing
Wow.
that. I know, bad on me. But I think the observation one. So I think listening post, observation post style stuff is developing good awareness is something that I think gets forgotten a lot these days. I think case in point, I mean, how's the stereotype now of everybody's walking around and they're doing this all the time? And nobody, like even just day-to-day life, people don't have their eyes up and looking around what's going on around them, much less like how do you actually scan correctly for, well, this is different. That's an indicator. I should look more into this. And I don't know. What do you think?
That and how not only how to scan, how to notice what is there that shouldn't be there, what is not there that should be there. But that's noticing how to notice, right? And that in itself is a lost art. But I think the other thing is that you have to how to notice without being obvious. So if you're in an urban area, are you sitting in a car? Well, that works for a while, but eventually people in the neighborhood go, that's creepy as hell. He's been in that car for 11 hours. How is he even going pee? I saw him bring coffee and donuts, that sort of thing. So, how to do it without being detected. Out in the wilderness, that's going to come in the form of hides. So building and erecting hides that allow you to observe without being observed. This is part of it as well.
Mm-hmm. I have a book. So I'm sure you remember Paladin Press. I got when they were going out of business, and they had a big sale. I bought a bunch of stuff. I've got one from Rex Applegate that's all about scouting and patrolling, and I use an example out of that one all the time, even in my day job when I'm teaching younger employees. But just about when you come, I hate to be like play the officer side of my background, being like, don't just come to me with like this problem. Tell me like everything you've learned about that problem first. And the example that he has is really good as a training exercise. Is somebody to go watch a bridge and have them report back. And it's like, all right, someone who's new at this will be like, oh yeah, it's a bridge. And then he says, what you're actually looking for is, all right, how long is a bridge? What's it made out of? How many supports does it have in case you have to demo it? How much weight can it support? What's the foliage look like on either side of it? How wide is it? It's like all these things you would want to like, why is it important there's a bridge? all right, well, let's capture all that information about it. So I use that as an example for a lot of our new employees when they're like, I have a problem. I'm like, okay, I might have a solution. Don't worry about a problem. I haven't gone as so far as the, there's like an old parable I had a former commander of mine give me that was like about, I don't remember. It was about puppies or something. And it's like, this is why you're the advisor. This is why you're the oarsman and he's the advisor, kind of parable, but I don't use that one. All right. Anyway, again, sidetracking. I rabbit hole real easy. Okay. So I want to get to, because we're coming up on 40 minutes. So I'm going to bring up the range card here to get back to, what are those available skills? Now, everything you just said, like you can go learn that stuff somewhere, like either One Shepherd or we mentioned MVT, Max Velocity Tactical, Brush Beater. I believe you mentioned Pegasus. Is it Pegasus? Yeah.
Yep. Well, it's Polaris. Yeah, Pegasus.
Polaris. Sorry, Polaris. And that's not even getting into the shooting stuff. Even just around here in North Virginia and West Virginia, I mean, you've got Storm Mountain. You've got lots of places to go learn shooting.
You have Mason-Dixon Tactical that does winter survival. So like that gets in more towards your seer. I think he's less about the escape and evasion, more about the survival side. And then you have out in Kansas City, you have S&S that does care under fire. Now, this isn't your long-term care. This is more of your immediate care and your extraction from threat. So, but you know what? You've got some really cool stuff. What's the company up there in like Wisconsin that does all the wilderness first aid for like camps and, you know, for people who are out there days hikes away from help, and they do some very serious sustained, first aid. So you can find these. Some of them are very cheap, tend to get what you pay for. You know, if you want to go deeper, you're going to get those professionals and those experienced people to help you do that. But yeah,
it's also like the bushcraft schools too. I think the one comes to mind is Dave Canterbury's group. I can't remember what they're called right now. But that's another one that just like all about bushcraft. You know, building shelters. How do you be more minimalist? Those are the whole being lighter concept of like, if you bring a tool for everything, then you're not going to get anywhere. It's so heavy. So learn to use this one tool lots of ways, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's going to get to. I want to bring in One Shepherd here. Like I'm not trying to like sales pitch everybody, but we keep talking about it, and some people not know what it is. So my understanding of One Shepherd is it has an interesting background because, as far as I can tell, you've been involved in like the small unit tactics, military teaching stuff for longer than a lot of places, but you came to it from wargaming, like. You know, paintball back in the day, now airsoft kind of stuff. But what was the original goal?
Yeah, so the original goal was a bunch of high school students who came together, and this is before airsoft, before paint. Well, paintball was still being used to mark trees and cattle, right? It's 1981, same year that National Training Center at Fort Irwin, U.S. Army stood that up. And we ran some weird parallels to them. So that's why I mentioned that. But anyway, it was a bunch of high school kids said, you know, we're reading books of World War II. We're watching movies about Vietnam. What's this thing called small unit tactics? And when they talk about guerrilla warfare, what are they talking about? So we all picked up different FMs and Ranger handbooks and, you know, cool guy books and stuff like this, you know, Soldier of Fiction and all. I'm sorry, I should say Soldier of Fortune. I'm sorry. Anyway, we picked those up and we all read, but we realized there's only so much you can do with reading. Why don't we just go out and start doing this? And we're blessed to have not what I would call an instructor. We never had anybody that stayed that long, an instructor or mentor. But we're blessed to have just enough family and friends that were warriors that were in the Marines or the Army or retired, and who would come and give us like a one afternoon pointer, right? And we'd go, oh, that helps us. And then we'd go out. But we were playing war games trying to figure out what it was. Now, of course, now I'm going to jump in and start, you know, getting all nerdy with, with educational terms. But when you go for motivation, learner motivation, if you're having a blast, you will put up with the road marches. You will put up with pulling your guard shift at 2 o'clock in the morning when it's 28 degrees, right? So you'll put up with those hardships because it makes the victory all that much more sweet, right? Or it makes the defeat all that much more meaningful. You guys, sit down and go, wow, what went wrong? That didn't go at all like we thought it would go. And so we were doing this, and I got to tell you, this gave me a huge leg up when I got to the School of the Infantry. I looked at these other guys and just like, wow, they were just so clueless. And even though I wasn't, I couldn't articulate a lot of it in terminology and stuff like that, I still understood it far more than just intuitively. I understood it in some sense in doctrine. And yeah, like I said, it took peers years to catch up with me and the others that went in the military. They had very similar experiences. And so when we came back together in the early 90s, when guys started getting out of the armed forces and coming back, they started reunion games right away. And by 1995, we literally said, people came and they said, okay, look, there's a huge disparity between combat arms, non-combat arms, and civilians. Like, there are three groups here that are way, each one runs circles around the other. And so what they asked us to do was specifically went to the infantry NCOs such as myself, and they said, hey, come up with a training. This is just like any soccer, intramural, whatever you want to call it, like local soccer games or basketball games through YMCA. Hey, we need a training program, so let's come up with that. And as soon as we started building it, I seem to recall there was like 2 Marines and 4 Army. They were all NCOs. I want to say it was like 4 of the 6 of us were infantry. There were some like aviation guys and some other stuff. But we were sitting there and we'd all been through the NCO academies and stuff like this. And we start looking at what we're building. And I remember we were in Jeff McGay's basement, all having beers, trying to get this planned out. And somebody said, wow, you know what this looks like? And we're like, what? And they're like, this all looks like the first NCO academy we all went to. And there was just this moment of, oh, crap. And, we'd also taught ROTC cadets in the summer, and this is what they had to go through. These are the classes we got them through. And we're like, dude, this is a leadership school. And as we sat there over beers and talked about it, it was just unanimous. And everybody's like, well, that's what it always has been. And so in 1995, we said, okay, no kidding. We're not just a gaming organization anymore. We're now a leadership school. And so that's what it is. So let me point out, if I can just belabor that just a little farther, it is a 6-semester program, right? So you come to us for 6 separate 7-day weeks, all right? In your first 3 weeks, your first 21 days in training, you are going through what we call the warrior track. And so I am teaching you just enough land navigation to get lost. I'm teaching you just enough bayonet, to get stabbed. I'm teaching you just enough comms and night vision and patrolling and all of this other stuff. I'm teaching you enough that you can embed in each one of those 3-day FTX at the end of each one of those semesters and meaningfully and participate as a warrior in that patrol. Now, when you hit the last 3 semesters, you're already, even in your first 3 semesters, the reality is that you're assuming more and more responsibility. But in those last 3 semesters, it really hikes up because you're in what's called the leader track. And all the courses you go to are leadership now. Even stick seminars and all that stuff, we're throwing you into platoon sergeant, platoon leader, squad leader, fire team leader positions. And so we're throwing you into that, and it's escalating over the next 3 semesters so that so that when you're done there, you really will have quite a bit of experience in 42 days of field training. You have quite a bit of experience under your belt. So the idea is to make you a warrior leader. And these are transferable skills. Look, management is an industry-specific skill, and it always will be. Management is always within industry. Are you in library science? Are you in theology and running a church? Are you running a call center, a shipping center? Are you are you in the military? Are you running a bar? Whatever it is, it's industry specific. That's management. Separate that from leadership. And the reality is you can't, but let's do that for a minute because leadership is discrete from management. Leadership is a universal art. think of everything I just said, from the library to the priest to the bar owner, to the high school teacher. Leadership applies to all of that, and it really doesn't vary. Now you can say, well, it varies as you go up in the institution. Yes, and we're going to talk about that, and you're going to learn that. But it doesn't vary. The leadership decision making and the way you influence others as a leader is a universal art. Management is an industry science, an industry specific science. So there are a double helix. If you look at a DNA, that's kind of what leadership and management do. You really cannot extract them from each other. That is, they are inextricable, but they are discrete. And so that's what we teach you at One Shepherd.
I totally get that you have that winding around the two, and it is a fun distinction. But something I want to go back to, we were talking about this, and I think this will get us to the last point before we go to Q&A here, is you mentioned teaching just enough, like small unit attacks, just enough comms, just enough night vision. So going back to our original concept here of what is the minimum capable citizen, would that be the skills you talked about? We stated we haven't really touched the marksmanship thing. I obviously think basic marksmanship is an important skill. Everybody should learn regardless. But what's the other ones? Like what is the minimum?
So
minimum skill set?
We just hit it, and you're going to touch it in your first 3 semesters at One Shepherd. You are going to hit a lot of these minimums, right? But you're not going to hit them in great depth. Here, let me point out one that we don't teach at One Shepherd. We need you to come with, you don't need to know how to use an AR-15. We'll teach you that. I need you to understand basic rifle marksmanship and basic firearm safety. You need to come with that. Then I'm going to put you into 21 days of training. And I would argue that is enough to embed you into a combat patrol, so that you can function as a member of that warrior team. Now, you need to go somewhere else if you want to say, well, for my village, I want to be the comm specialist. Well, then you need to go to brush beaters. If you say, no, for my village, I want to be the aid specialist, well, then you need to go seek probably an EMT, emergency medical technician training. Okay. So whatever it is that you want to specialize in, you're not going to get that level in the 21 days of warrior track training in One Shepherd. But you will touch on it so that you can see, hey, is this an aptitude that I'm passionate about? Is this an aptitude that surprised me and I'm quite good at? So, I would say that that's what you're going to do. Just enough firearm safety, marksmanship training, and 21 days of warrior training gets you just enough.
So I think that's probably going to be the answer then, as far as we're talking about minimum viable candidate, minimum capable citizens are just enough warrior training to say that, hey, they know how to safely use a rifle. You teach them the mechanics, of whatever rifle they're going to use. May not necessarily be an AR-15. They need to know the basics of communication, and not necessarily radio, but maybe things like, hey, what about just how to communicate well and clearly and briefly?
Yeah.
Probably some basic first aid. Same stuff we all had to do over and over again of like, hey, can you stop a wound from bleeding? And
right.
I would argue that maybe slapping a tourniquet on it these days isn't the most viable thing for our situation here. But hey, it's what you got. Land navigation, basics of land navigation, and I would say leadership. I don't know. Leadership is an interesting one to me, but I feel like that's something that in our situation we're talking about, someone would probably has that leadership mindset, and they would actually just need to go learn the other skills to keep along with them.
Right. I would say that's a specialization like some of the others we discussed. I really do believe that leadership, not everybody's comfortable doing it. Not everybody wants that responsibility.
Yeah.
When we say 21 days, well, what's the magic? What's in there? I'm teaching you how to, again, embed in a patrol, run daytime patrols, nighttime patrols, live on the ground for multiple days in a row, and be comfortable enough. But also how, bullet avoidance, how not to get shot, how to shoot the enemy. One of the things I'll tell you, just real quick anecdote, one of the things that one of our more recent warriors came to us, and he has quite a bit of experience. And he said, look, I'm not going to name names here because I don't want to offend anybody, but he said what really impressed him about One Shepherd was his very, very first semester with us. During the FTX, there came a situation where he just had to take command. I mean, the other guys were dead, and he went, damn, it's on me. I'm the voice. So he was like, wasn't ready for it. But he said, I just gave an order and then spun in middle of the darkness. I, turned 90 degrees, said, get online. And then I started assaulting through the rest of the objective. And he said, to his absolute dismay, people that he'd only spent a week with, he said, I looked to the left and right of me, and everybody is lockstep. They're all moving with me. They're all engaging the enemy. It's fire and maneuver. And he said, I couldn't believe that. He's like, all of my gaming experiences, I've never seen that except in the top tier competitive teams. And he's like, and I've been with these guys for, at that point, maybe 5.5 days. And he's like, holy crap, everybody does this. So when I say what's the minimum, it is that. It's learning the jargon, learning the culture, but also learning battle drills and learning, patrolling techniques. You're going to learn all this in 21 days. It's a bit of drinking from the fire hose, but we give you application. It's not just sitting there looking at a whiteboard and someone droning on, brah, 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 brah. It's like, no, I'm going to brah, 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 brah for a while now. Let's go out and try it. How'd that feel? Oh, it failed. Tell me about that. Great. I'm glad we did that for 4 days, because now the next 3 days, I know you're good and exhausted, but let's go do this for, nonstop. Let's go for broke. Push yourself to that end. Sure. And so you learn grit. You learn things you don't even realize.
Learn how to fail. To learn how to fail, which a lot of people don't know how to do these days. So we are going to be opening Q&A here. I do see y'all watching, so go ahead and ask your questions to Doc. I'm going to open with the first one here, though, Doc, because I posed this one to you before, which is, so we've talked a lot about the training side of like, hey, what are all the skills you can go do? Where do you see mistakes? What are the biggest mistakes you see people making doing this?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. Not seeing the forest through the trees. Look, I can't tell you how many people come to One Shepherd, right? And One Shepherd is squad on squad all the way to platoon on platoon. This is the kind of fight you're going to get in. So you may be 12 guys fighting 16 guys, or you might be 35 guys fighting 45 guys, and all things in between. And so when they get there, they say things like, these are just examples. I really thought speed reload would be a bigger deal. But when you're fighting with, 14 of your bestest buds, your reloads can be far more lax, because you got weapon systems firing here and weapon systems firing there. You got to cover them. You go down, they cover you. You get your gun back up and running. So that's one thing they say. And they talk about like all the look, every technique you learn with firearms, right? The latest, greatest technique, it is useful. It is a promise that's useful. It's a cool thing. Don't stop learning the latest, greatest technique. And don't stop going, well, I need to get my holes closer and closer together and shorter time. This is all very, very useful, but it's useful in ways that surprise people, because they get out to this and force on force environment and they're like, it is useful for discipline, but it doesn't translate actually into the fight.
So I have two things on that one, that just because those two examples are really good ones. So I spent a lot of my time, I'm not an infantry guy, so I spent a lot of time working on the marksmanship side of the house, and then a little, middling skills. And I remember, though, when I actually got to go do the small unit tactics, you mentioned max velocity, that's where I did it for 4 days. Those two topics exactly came up. The first one was the marksmanship piece. I didn't even realize it. I spent so much time working on prone and squatting and sitting and kneeling, and the terrain's uneven. There's a root under your boot. You're behind the tree. Like, you're not going to get a proper kneeling position, period. But the fact that you spent so much time preparing to get one meant you learned enough about controlling your body and your fundamentals and natural point of aim that you still made it work. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I think you pick up from doing all that kind of stuff, or just how quickly you get that natural point of aim. On the magazine one is a funny thing, because I posted an interview last week with Mike Green of Green Ops,
Hmm.
And we were talking about the tactical games. And I asked a question to him about what has influenced your tactical kit by doing the games and the vice versa. And he mentioned keeping us one magazine for that speed reload, but the rest are covered. Whereas you look out there today and you see a lot of glamorizing CQB style, a lot of entertainment, if you will, where everybody's got rows of quick access, open top magazines. I do it too. I mean, I've wrote articles and battle belts and things, and that's the configuration set up in.
Hmm.
But I've even then, after that the small unit stuff, I realized the first rule of a firefight is have a gun. Second rule is have your friends with guns. You don't need to be that fast, and retention becomes more important than having everything accessible to you. And anyway, that's my non-infantry opinion, but
No, that's spot on. I find the same thing. I love a shingle, or a taco or whatever it is, and I like to have one, two, or three. Depending on what kind of shingle I have, I like to have one, two, or three on me. But everything else is covered because number one, I assume I'm going to lose the stuff in the shingle when I'm really taking a tumble and crawling through the mud and the dirt and rock and the rocks in the river and I'm all this stuff. I expect to come out the other end without those magazines. And if you have them, you look down and you're like, well, that's caked with gravel and mud. So I need to go to a clean one. And I will have the time 98% of the time. Notice I didn't say 100% of the time. So,
it's always that one.
You hit the nail on the head. When we're fighting outside a building in urban, mount, right, versus in the woods and anything in between, up in the mountains and all this stuff, that's quite a bit different than fighting in someone's kitchen. Fighting in someone's kitchen, those drills that you're doing, that's where those drills really come from, and that's when they're practical. Yet the reality is you can do a 20-year career in the special forces and never fight in someone's kitchen. Like literally, you'll never use that drill. Or you might very well use that drill more than once, and it can save your life. So it's more about the discipline than about the drill itself.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes, once in a blue moon, it's actually about the drill. So question, when will the 2022 One Shepherd dates be released? So if you go to our website right now, they are actually posted. There are 2 with Bravo Company out in West Virginia, and there are 2 with Alpha Company out in Central Missouri. They are up now, and we just confirmed all that because it says at the top, please don't buy your airline ticket. People flying in from, California, Austria, all over the world, right? They fly. We're like, don't do that till registration opens. And, I say that. And a lot of times, once we get an idea at the end of October, what the next year is going to look like, there aren't changes. There were changes this year after we posted our expected, I think it's our projected schedule. We had the facilities come back and say, both of them come back and say, oh, that time won't work for these reasons. Can you move it? And so what is up there now is actually what is going to be released January 8th, Saturday, January 8th. Registration opens for all of 2022 for all 4 semesters.
And are you? So I think on the couch, it's not you who's putting it on, but somehow I heard about it through association with you. But the Wilderness Brutality is coming up too. I feel like there's a lot of stuff coming up in this like a very close time frame that I want to get involved in. And I'm like,
oh yeah. So you'll see One Shepherd guys out there. We're they're inviting us to do a little bit of a promo. We get to be the ROs. But no, who's sponsoring that is Pegasus Test is his YouTube channel. But of course, that's Les Winter with Polaris Training Division. So Polaris is working with the in-range guys and all of that to host that. That's going to be at Echo Valley Training Center in May. Yep, mid-May. It's their first time they're doing Woodland Brutality. So yeah, really glad to see that.
Yeah, I think that's going to be. I love seeing this new trend of competitions that are combining the shooting with the physical aspects, whether it's the brutality events or tactical games, or we had an article about like tactical biathlon. The NRL Hunter series is going on now, where it's similar, like it's long range precision shooting with a lot of rucking your gear around the mountains. Like I love seeing this stuff happening.
Oh yeah. See a lot of global war on terror wiped out in one shepherd. Guatters. Guatters. Wiped out. If you mean like they come and they try to apply counterinsurgency operations in ours, which are overwhelmingly, but not entirely, it's overwhelmingly, we create the simulation is called an FTX or a SimX. That simulation, yeah, we fight peer on peer. So we fight peer and near peer armies. That's what it's. So if you have artillery, they have artillery. If you have close air support, they have close air support, either notionally or some way it's simulated. And so, yeah, there's not a whole lot of, hey, we're going to go into the market, meet people, talk to them, see how they're doing, and then we're going to go do a checkpoint operation. This isn't making fun of or belittling counterinsurgency at all. It is, America begins with an insurgency, right? So, and we fight, what I love is, and I use that love, it drives me nuts to hear, oh, America's never fought a war like this. They're guerrilla soldiers. Yes, okay. We've fought one guerrilla warfare after another, one insurgency after another. Central America and, the Philippines and, Native American Indians and in Vietnam, and it just keeps going, right? Afghanistan and Iraq were not our first trip to the rodeo. It's just that you always fight the last war. So we were studying so hard how to fight the Soviet Union that, a lot of units had lost that counterinsurgency fight. And now the pendulum swung the other way. We spent 20 years fighting counterinsurgency, coin operations that, a lot of units have forgotten how to fight it near peer. So we were told back in 2009, 2010, our warriors, our enlisted and officers going in all the way back then, saying, wow, I just got in, I got my commission, got my platoon in 10th Mountain, and no one here knows how to do face paint. They haven't done face paint, and they've been in the Army for 4 years. This is 2010. And they're like, they don't even see face paint, right? So you say, well, why is that important? Well, because when you're fighting a near peer, all of these skills, fighting position with overhead cover. When's the last time, someone dug one of those? Right. Well, we do in West Shepherd. We're a bunch of old fuddy-duddies that, went through the 80s and 90s when the Soviet, yes, we had counterinsurgency in Central America we had to deal with, but our primary mission, so that was our secondary mission. Our primary mission was, the Fulda Gap. It was the Soviet Union coming through the Fulda Gap in Europe, and we were going to fight urban warfare at what's called high-intensity conflict. So high-intensity conflict is that an enemy armored platoon backed by an infantry platoon assumes a city block, and we've got to route out their T-72s, T-80s. So I have to go not only take on their infantry and their BMPs hidden in buildings, in skyscrapers even, and we've got to go out and neutralize those main battle tanks as well. And so that's our mechanized infantry platoon, right? And people say, well, okay, so you're going to do this, you're going to fatal funnel. We don't have fatal funnels in high intensity fights. And yes, One Shepherd has trained a little bit in this. And so it's hard to find the facilities, but we have done this in the past and we will do it again. And so one of the things is like, well, what do you mean you don't have a fatal funnel? Everybody has a fatal funnel. No. The main battle tank blows a hole that's about 6 foot by 8 foot wide, kills everybody inside. Then your whole entire squad rushes in at one time and then just kills everybody while they're still stunned and laying on the ground. You shoot them all in the head. And so you're like, wait, what? What about the civilians on the battlefield? What civilians on the battlefield? This is Stalingrad.
So this goes back to what you said about, like, we're so accustomed to thinking about a specific time and place of a fight that, there's another conversation that I can't remember if I was on this stream with you. Again, it was one of Brent's, but we talked about, we have not been training to be the underdog anymore. That, like, we just assume we're going to have all the advantages. And from the military standpoint, you just assume, we assume you're going to have air cover. They're not going to have enough air defense. You're going to have the tanks. They're not going to have it. You're going to have this. They're not going to have that. And then, so I could see, to go to actually the question or the comment by Pew Pew here, is that you get people who are accustomed to having all those advantages, and now you're in the woods with another group who is at least somewhat organized, and you don't have the advantages anymore. And how good are you at those original tactics that we trained forever? Under special forces guys still do this. Like they work on this because this is their job, like really high end infantry tactics. But the average person, I mean, not as much.
Well, so that's just it. So we have combat experience. Half our cadre are veterans, and the other half aren't. And we have a lot of combat experienced infantry. We even have Air Force Special Forces. We as our black hat instructors and stuff like that. And they come in and they look and they go, "An SOI? You guys use an SOI? Doesn't everybody use sync Rs and digital encryption?" And I'm like, no, we assume.
It's just funny how that goes back to my background of like, yeah, we had communications plans with encoded messages transmitted in the clear. That's just how we did it. And it was just like, it's funny to hear like that's so Cold War of us. I guess it makes sense for what I used for the minute.
Well, because it's the last time we fought, peer and near peer, or at least prepared to fight peer and near peer. And so you have to assume all of that digital encryption is compromised. You have to. So yeah, we're just talking comms. I mean, it's across the board there, but tell Doc my wilderness environment is a swamp all around. I'm stuck in an urban area or I'll sink in the mud and be eaten by alligators. Yeah. I hear you. I hear you. But here's the really cool thing about that, Pew Pew, is what you just told me is from one city to the next, from one township to the next, the enemy is canalized. Their lines of communication, their lines of support and logistics, in fact, their lines of advance are very, very canalized into easily ambushed and threatened, lines. And so that's good news for you. That's actually bad news for your bad guys.
I think that's getting into ambush tactics, which is extremely interesting, and I would love to spend a lot more time talking about setting those up. But yeah, I think that's about knowing your terrain. It's knowing your terrain around you and how do you use that to your advantage.
Yep. Knowing how to disappear. What size is a village, people, area, and natural disaster scenario? Or said another way, what density of a minimum capable citizen is required to be useful as a team? Okay, so it seems like that's two different questions. So what size is a village? Well, let's kind of like, you're right. These are loosely defined. I've heard that cities, some people say have to be 100,000 to be considered a mid-sized city, have to be 70,000, so a small city might be sub, 30,000 or less, 40,000 or less. And when you get down to villages, obviously there's going to be different sizes too. But I went to high school in a village that was 1,800 people. Okay. The entire population of the village. It was a farm village, but that's where my dad was military and all that, but he had retired. So I went to middle school and high school in one village. It was 1,800. So I'm thinking when you talk villages, they're measured in either a few hundred or maybe a few thousand. But that's what I tend to think of a village. After that, you're really getting into a town and then quickly into a city.
Yeah, and I'm thinking in terms of like, scenario X, as it got brought up in here, is almost down to neighborhood level. So how many people? Because like your neighborhood. Like, that pretty well. And, there's going to be blending areas where one goes next, but you generally, your neighborhood. So if we're thinking like major natural disaster, hurricane came through, a lot of people bailed out because they could, and a lot of people stayed, I'm thinking you're probably in the realm of 30 to 50 is what you're going to have available to help out.
You know what? Now, availability are two different things, but to get more specific, Lindy Beach does, and I probably butchered the poor man's name, but he does these history kind of military videos. He's been around forever. And he has one on what is a platoon, what is a company. One of the ways he described a company, which is larger than a platoon, it's made up of multiple platoons. The way he described a company, and he said it numbers somewhere around 100 to 150. And it's true, depending on which military and what kind of company it is. That's a real good rule of thumb, 100 to 150 people. He describes this as, this is the largest military unit where you can reasonably be expected to know everybody by name, by face and name. So think of that when you're talking about to be useful as a team, I'm not saying you need a company, but you should probably shape and form yourselves into action cells that are fire team and squad level, right? That then bridge up to a platoon of maneuver. If those fire team squads had to come together, you understand, okay, our banner is so-and-so with our platoon commander and our platoon sergeant. And then understand that that's your clan, like, right? That platoon, 20, 30, 40 people, that's your clan, but you can bring multiple platoons, 2, 3, even 4 platoons together to form into that larger group where you'd look around and say, I don't work with these guys on a regular basis, but I know everybody by face and name. And if I don't, then I know who brought them in. Okay, that's so-and-so's cousin. Yeah.
I feel like there's something at the tip of my tongue where this idea about you mentioned 100 people is about the most people you could know and have a tight knit group with. Something's in the tip of my mind. I've read that before, not in a military context, but just from a tribe building context. Maybe it was one of the psychologists who wrote a book about building tribes and leadership. But that was the limit for like a human limit is about 100 people. That like this is the closest you're gonna have tight bonds. Beyond that, you're just kind of getting into, and I would unfortunately argue that a lot of people who are involved in this community probably don't have that many they can call on. Yeah.
Well, that's a good point.
So
for me, that's one of the great things that militia do, though, is if you have a militia group where you can come regularly, even if regular means once or twice a year, like, a Saturday, Sunday, once a year, where you come together and you're like, oh, look, the whole company is here. But it does bring the question, what's the merit of coming together as a larger organization, like a battalion or a regiment? The answer is that those battle staffs get quite a bit out of that, but they can do that virtually. And so I would say that when you're training in a militia unit, typically the largest unit you train in on any kind of regular basis would be a company. Again, you spend far more time at platoon and squad level.
So just because this came out, here he goes, Dunbar's number. The suggested cognitive limit to the number of people who can maintain a stable social relationship. I have never heard of this. Thank you for commenting on it. Like I knew that was out there, and I proposed a lie between 100 to 250. Common value of 150. And there you go. So Dunbar's number now has a name now. Cool. So back to the original question though. What is a minimum capable citizen? How many minimum capable citizens are required to be useful as a team? This is an interesting question because I think we're getting into this distinction between not everybody needs to be a fighter. So like earlier at the beginning, you said, well, this is a young man's game. You should learn these things before your early mid-30s. I mean, go to ham radio as an example. There's a perfectly good use for those Elmers out there who are 60 plus years old. You can't hand them a rifle and a ruck, but man, you can put them on radio. So I think a lot of it's knowing who those people are.
Medic, transportation, they can drive and run logistics on the vehicles. You need drivers, you need radios, operators, you need medics. You need people that cook and feed other people and pass information. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But I would say this, I'm going to use U.S. doctrine, but a lot of militaries in the world do not break down smaller than squads. So I think that's also why they trend towards small squads. They trend towards squads of 8 to 10. Where U.S. trends towards a larger squad, not always, but trends towards that because we break into fire teams, right? So it sounds like what I'm saying is 4 people is the minimum number. And I think that that's right. If you look at rest cycles and 2 up, 2 down, and all this other stuff, you would say 4. But really, that's only true if you have another fire team to support you. So what I'm trying to say is 4 makes a whole lot of sense, from logistics to cognitive control, what's called a span of control, to rest cycles. 4 makes a lot of sense. But if you're operating independently, seriously, let's just say you're going out on a 3-4 day surveillance reconnaissance patrol. You need to provide security to your patrol 24 hours a day. So when you stop to rest, 2 up, 4 down, 2 up, 4 down, 2 up, 4 down, 6. You're starting to see more and more, and there's a lot of literature out there that said long range patrols were typically 6. And so I think if that's what you're thinking, I'd have to say not 4, 6. If you're part of a larger organization, 4 is perfectly fine.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really comment on like the infantry tactics side of it, but I mean, 4 makes sense for a fire team. But then also generally, I would say, remembering some of the writings from others who I've been reading, who write about like from a civilian standpoint of like if you're trying to build a team together, you're talking to a 4-person fire team, 1 person who's in charge, and then 1 is a support element who probably has your precision rifle or something with a little heavier hitting like a semi-auto 308. So 6, again, back to that number. So it's just kind of it came to me on that one.
Yeah.
I actually think that was MVT. I picked that one up from. So interesting question though. But yeah, then you start talking the rest of it. I don't know. I was saying to go back to the original thought here is useful as a team. All right. Yeah. So that is a fighting team. I still think there's a lot of room to build this out with additional skills that don't necessarily mean they're going to be traveling around. I don't know what that would be. You mentioned logistics. We talked about radio. Someone who's better at medical. To go back to the ID'd example, do you need runners? Hey, that can be the neighborhood kids on bicycles, doing dead drops. Why not?
Yeah, no, it can. But you know what? Like even let's just say something like a medical team or a comms team or a mess, which is cooking, right? Cooking for the troops. Mess team. If you say, look, you don't want people to pull guard alone. I never send 1 person to do anything. You don't take a poop alone. Okay. It's just too dangerous. So I want 2. And now I start to think about, okay, well, I've got a mess section and I've got to feed people. And I've got to feed them more or less round the clock, or I'm going to break it into a third. Anyways, what I'm trying to say here is if I got 2 guys cooking and 4 guys resting, that's right. And then I got, and then you rotate that. So when you stop to think about almost any team, what you really do is you really want to get technical. It's not just 4 people resting. It's 2 guys working. Let's say they're first aid. They're the ER, right? 2 guys working. 2 guys resting with boots on. That means they can be called if these 2 are overwhelmed and need more people. And 2 guys with boots off in nice clean sheets somewhere, hopefully sleeping. But the point is, so that's your rest cycle. It's your rest and maintenance cycle is, again, 2 guys on, 2 guys on call, but off, and 2 guys off. Like, don't call them. Handle it. All right? And so unless it's life and limb, then everybody's up fighting. But I just think 6 keeps coming up. If you look at it, 6 as a useful independent team, 6 is there. Again, if you're part of a larger, if you're part of a 14-man squad, a command team of 2 and 3 fire teams, no, I just want 4 men on the fire team. And I'll argue that till I'm blue in the face, that it comes down to human cognition and span of control. It's 1 up, myself, and 3 down. That's your max under pressure. I'm saying under pressure. I mean, like life and death. Like you're going to die in the next 9 seconds unless you get something done. Then you cannot handle more than 5. Just humans don't do that, right? And I've got to report to my higher command. I've got to be aware of my own self so I don't get myself killed. And then I've got to direct the movement of 3 men below me. And so 4 is all you can do.
So the next thing that comes to mind, building on this, then is the, and this is going to get towards the end, but the building this network. Like if you don't already have this set up, how does someone go about finding their team? I mean, the obvious answer to me is like the 2 stand out are, well, how well do you know your neighbors already? That's a lost art. And I'll admit I'm not great about it, but growing up, we knew all of our neighbors. Like that was just how we did it. And then also I think going to training classes, and especially if you can find people local, competitions too. And that's where you meet local people doing stuff. And then they're already at least more like-minded than you're not at that point, because you're both there to shoot in competition. So if you go to wilderness brutality, you already have a glimpse of like a pretty good idea of the other people who are there and what they're about.
Right. Yeah, 2-gun, 3-gun competitions, but frankly, it can be bench rest, it can be cowboy shoots. Any kind of competition is good. I would say if you're doing, what is it, CrossFit and Ironman and things like this too, you if you belong to a club that does mountain biking or primitive camping, these are also these are fiercely independent people. Now they may not be a warrior yet, but they at least have the right mindset, and that they're physically capable. So I think there's things like that that you have to, look to. Yeah, America doesn't. Okay, let me say this. So America is the most mobile, socially mobile nation on earth. And I don't know if these stats hold true now, but I remember being told, gosh, it was probably around 2000, the year 2000, 2001, that 60% of Americans, 60% live within, I want to say it's 20 miles of their parents. Think about that for a second. 60% of Americans live within 20 miles of their parents. So this isn't to say that they don't go farther for college or for the military or for vacation. But where they live, where they buy their home, where they have their career and stuff like this is very, very close to their parents and who they grew up with. Now, that is not my case at all, but I'm an anomaly. I'm an Army brat, and then I was a soldier, and then I was a contractor. So I don't live anywhere near family. But for most of us, because 40% of us don't, right? That's what that 60% means is, 60% of the time it works every time. Well, okay, but 40% of the time it doesn't. Now, so I do want to say that if you're one of those people that have that comfort factor built in, then who's who in the zoo already, because your uncles and your grandpappy and your mom knows the barber and or the hair beautician, and so they already know who's who, and you should too, and you should hook up with like people. And for the sake of citizens' defense, get over the fact that that whatever, the dude married your cousin and didn't do right by her. But if you're not that, then it's going to be more difficult. By the way, when you look at other nations that are, we're very mobile, things like Germany and England, I think they claim something like 85% or 80% live within 20 miles of their parents. So you really do have, America really is one of the most mobile, socially mobile, but what we forget is that more than half of us still reside close to where we were raised. And if that sounds like I'm being condescending, no, quite the opposite. I'm saying I'm jealous of you people because you already know who you can trust. Now, get with them, get shooting, and get training.
There it is. All right. Thank you, Doc. So this is to get the end of it. So I'm going to give you the final word here before I kind of close this out. So thank you for coming out here. I appreciate you coming on. I know it's December 29th, so right before New Year's. So it's kind of a heck of a night to do a stream. So if people want to find you or contact you, how can you do that?
Well, of course, you can go to my my YouTube channel. It is it's very hard to get there because it's my name, Christopher Larsen. So Larsen. And so people are like, oh, what is it? Well, it's Sniper 69. No, it's just Christopher Larsen. So that YouTube. Can I give if you want my email, ping me on YouTube and then I'll just give it to you, because I don't know if we're allowed to do this anymore in the ionosphere, is give out our emails. But of course, check out One Shepherd. If you are into warrior training and want to start doing that at small unit tactical level, certainly you're going to get that for your first 3 semesters. And then if you stick through the whole 6 semesters and graduate our program, we will absolutely initiate you into the warrior leadership. So it's what we do. I'm very proud of that. And beyond that, you can find me in the funny pages. Like I said, hopefully by roughly third quarter is what I'm expecting, is the OPT 4 smart book on, it'll be called Hybrid Threat, probably is its title. But anyway, it will cover insurgency, guerrilla warfare, and it will include, of course, terrorism and crime cartels as well.
All right, Doc, thank you very much. I bumped my damn mic again. Thank you very much for coming out this evening. Thank you for everybody who came to watch this evening. I know December 29th, again, kind of a quiet night right before that awkward week in between Christmas and New Year's. So it was a good time, good conversation, Doc. I'd love to have you back sometime. We can talk more about some of this other stuff. I feel like there's a lot of rabbit holes that we had to dance around to try and stick to a schedule here. So thanks again, everybody. And don't forget to hit that like button, that subscribe button, and also on Doc's channel as well. I'm doing the YouTuber thing. And don't forget to come by the website, everydaymarksman.co. You're going to find all of there's what I want. That's where you're going to find all the articles, podcast episodes, YouTube videos like this one get reposted there, and as well as our awesome community of marksmen who I've been seeing chat through the Discord all night. So thank you all for coming out, and thank you for subscribing. And I will catch you all next time. Later.